Welcome to the 4-day online festival Georgiens Erste Republik 1918 bis 1921, Geschichte, Literatur, Kunst, that is organized by Writers' House of Georgia in partnership with the Berlin Literaturhaus L'Etretage and UNESCO project Tbilisi World Book Capital 2021. And welcome to this talk, Female Writers and Feminism in Georgia, Literature as part of emancipatory movements from the First Republic to recent times. I'm Barbara Lehnerer, speaking from Munich, and with me in Tbilisi is Tamta Melashvili. Welcome, Tamta. I'm very delighted to speak to you.
Good evening, and thank you for being the moderator of this event.
It's my pleasure. The festival is inspired by Georgia's first democratic republic and marks the centenary of the Soviet occupation in 1921 and the 30th anniversary of the restoration of independence of Georgia in May 1991. Georgia is not only the legendary home of Medea and the Golden Fleece, has its own non-Indo-European language and an old and rich literature dating from the 5th century. It is also Europe's first nationwide experiment in democratic socialism. This brief period of independence from Tsarist Russia sparked off an explosion in literature and the arts. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, its capital, Tbilisi, with its famous cafe culture, became a multi-ethnic meeting point or even haven for writers and artists fleeing the Tsarist Empire. Women had the vote at that time, and there were 5 women MPs. When the Bolsheviks invaded Georgia in February 1921, the Red Army not only destroyed the Democratic Republic, but eradicated its modernist avant-garde. Before we now focus on this period and the question of what happened to literary, respectively female voices during the following 70 years of Soviet rule, and a new visibility of female writing during the 30 years of restored independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Tamta Melashvili. Tamta Melashvili is an acclaimed writer, feminist activist, and university teacher at Tbilisi State University, who started to write during her year in Germany. She has written about female migration and German communities in Georgia, has published short stories and 3 novels. Her works have been translated into many different languages, and she won a number of literary awards. Her debut novel, Countdown or Counting Out, published in 2010, was followed by an immense success. It won the prestigious Georgian Saba Prize in 2011 for Best Debut, depicting 2 teenage girls in a provincial town in an unnamed war zone. It was written soon after the 2000 Russian-Georgian War. The novel was translated into German by Nadja Mikeladze-Barsaliani, published under the title Abzählen in Unionsverlag, and won the Young Adult Award, den Deutschen Jugendliteraturpreis, in 2013. And this is actually exactly the time when I discovered the book and read it. So I'm very well acquainted with it. Tamta's second novel, Eastwards, published in 2015, is also set in present-day Georgia and explores women's taboo sexuality, but also some of Georgia's Soviet and post-Soviet untold history. Tamta has also written a 3rd novel with a wonderful title, in English, Blackbird Blackbird Blackberry, that was published in 2020. It's a novel about a middle-aged single woman who lives in a closed traditional society and environments. We come to these books, we come later to talk about them. But I have another question first. Tamta, the issues that run like a common thread through your novels and short stories are inequality, underrating the power of women, abuse, and social traumas. Does the First Republic of Georgia, that lasted only 3 years and was undoubtedly a remarkable period, still have a meaning for you as a contemporary writer and feminist?
Oh, it's a very good question. Yes, it has a big meaning for me as a citizen of Georgia, first of all, for me as a feminist activist, and partly for me as a writer, because it was a short period of time, but it's a very precious part of history for me, because the government was led by social democrats. The women were present in political and cultural life. So, as you mentioned, we had these 5 MPs, we had the right to vote, etc. But overall, the context had its preconditions. And the precondition was this very intensive suffragist struggle, which began in the beginning of 20th century in Georgia. There was very interesting pattern in a way, because feminists by then were also activists and also writers. So writing from the beginning for Georgian women was very, very much political. So it was not like, it was different from France or Britain, where women started writing mostly started writing in 18th century. And it was mainly romances or some beautiful love stories. So the context was different here, and the content was different. So of course there were some love stories in their fiction, but still, when you read their texts, you still feel the main line goes that the main line that lays there. So it touches very important things, such as the issues of social issues, the issues of equality, the issues of women's rights in many different contexts. So again, I will repeat that despite of the fact that this our first independence, the independence of the First Republic lasted only for 3 years. It's really precious time, just precious period of history for me. I think that everybody who appreciates the fact that she or he is too lucky to live in an independent state, so is in love with these 3 years we had in the beginning of 20th century, almost 100 years ago.
Yes, I see that. And but when you, Tamta, when you started as a writer and feminist activist, or even before as a young girl, as a teenager, did you know of this generation of women, creative women and political women who had lived, as you said, almost a century before you, which is a long time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel special bonding to these women, but mainly as a feminist activist, not as a writer, unfortunately. So, because, the fate of these women was quite sad during the Soviet period. So they started their activism, their writing. In the beginning of 20th century, they were quite prolific during the First Republic. And then the Soviet, with the beginning of the Soviet Union, they experienced, some kind of double pressure from very patriarchal institutions on the one side, and from totalitarian regime on the other. So with the Soviet Union, the Writers' Union was established in 1921, and it was a very male-dominated institution. And these women writers, were totally marginalized. Yes, marginalized from the literary
Tamta, maybe we come back to that a little later, because before that, this is my very urgent question as well. But before, I would like to talk about your second novel, not the first one now, a little bit later, but the second novel, Eastwards, because that is very interesting to me, because that is set in present Georgia, in present day Georgia, as well as the first one, but it goes back to the poets of the First Republic, or the 10s and the 20s. And let me just introduce a little bit what it's about, so we have more time for questions and answers. Its protagonist, Irina, who is suffering from some personal trauma or traumas, is researching a suspected love affair between Tbilisi's famous avant-garde poet Paolo Yashvili and the mystical poet Elena Dariani. Yashvili co-founded the Blue Horns, a group of Georgian symbolist poets and prose writers who dominated the Georgian literature in the 1920s. He was suppressed under the Soviet rule early in the 1930s and shot himself when under pressure. Your novel implies that 14 famous pseudonymous erotic poems attributed to Yashvili were actually written by Elena Dariani. And as I read, the question of the authorship of the poems is an issue that apparently is still discussed in today's Georgia. I have two questions. The first one is, what made you bring exactly this topic into your own fiction in the 21st century?
The authorship of these poems was interesting, also interesting issue for me on the one hand, and on the other, I wanted somehow to deal with the Soviet past in this novel. And as you said, this is the novel, this is a book about a young woman who suffers from some failed love affair and also some personal traumas. And who starts to investigate this secret love story between this famous poet of Paolo Yashvili and this enigmatic poet Elena Dariani. So she starts to investigate the story, but what she does is rather fabrication of a new myth, of a new love triangle. And the reader follows how she does it. So with this, I wanted to show that it's not easy for us, neither on individual level nor on societal level, to analyze or deconstruct the difficult past we had during the Soviet times. But instead what we are constantly doing is the recreation of the myths that already exist. So it's also connected to trauma as well. And with this novel, I had different experience as an author because it seemed that the readers and the critics had different expectations from me, because they, as far as I guess now, they expected something, another love with this passionate love story. But what I did actually, and I did it on purpose, was to deconstruct this love mythology as well, along with this Soviet past mythology. And me also, as a writer, I had different expectations towards the readers, because I expected this, harsh disputes about, at least about the Stalinist purges. But what I got mainly it was the silence. But still, I can explain it in a way that it's not it's not easy to deal. It's not easy to deal with the past, especially with the difficult past, like we had, especially in 1930s.
Yeah, I understand that. Do you think the dispute over authorship has to do with this attitude?
In a way, yes, because uh, mainly yes, it's a part of this overall mythology, because some people, and among them are literary critics who are more conservative, they prefer to have this the only idea that the author was Paula Yashvili, and they don't accept in no ways another just alternatives that someone could be or could be the author as well. But you know, for us, for feminists, it was a big appealing idea. It was we have not been like fixed to the idea that the author is Elena Dariani, but we liked to bring into the discussion the fact that okay, let's discuss something alternative. Why not? Because we're not living in a society with the only truth, or with the only I don't know, with the only history. So let's discuss or even imagine different ways and things. But you know, those people who feel themselves very attached to the idea that the author was Yashvili, they feel really disturbed by any different alternatives. And but still, this is the discussion is still ongoing, but it didn't bring any other results, because it didn't go beyond. It didn't touch any other wider topics like the purges again, or like the reconsideration or re-evaluation of the past. Yeah. Unfortunately, still it remains in the closed, in the closed discussion of who is the author and why these feminists are bringing the ideas of the new authorship.
Yeah. Well, the silence you were met with as a reaction to your novel, the silence you were talking about, brings us actually back to the 70 years of Soviet Union. And as you mentioned before, maybe you want to tell a little bit more about the position of women writers during this period of at least of 17 years, which is an extremely long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, there were like institutional barriers for these women, and also cultural barriers, and there's the great pressure of this totalitarian regime, and also hindrances from the writers' union. And what they did actually was some of them quitted writing at all, or some of them found shelter in children's literature. Okay. So these women still, they were in their prime of their literary career, because they were in their 40s or 50s, but they had actually no spaces and no options to write or to express themselves as writers, which is a really sad story. And
maybe they even wrote, but didn't have a chance to publish at any point.
Yes, maybe, but there is the issues of censorship, of course, and also self-censorship, because, and also the issue of the archives. And the archives we have, they're very fragmented, so you don't get much sense what were the feelings or what were the context that these women were living in, and the fact that this writers' union was the barrier for women. So the evidence for this, I think, is the fact that during, I don't know, more than 70 years, it did not, let's say, so produced women, acclaimed women writer, apart from two exceptions, but these are really two exceptions, one poet and one fiction writer. So during the Soviets, you know, when someone asks me, or used to ask me, and I didn't know much of the context, who were the famous writers of Georgia during the Soviet times, I didn't know whom to name, because the women were absent. So it's somehow, yeah.
Okay. Tamta, after Georgia's new independence in 1991, a decade of civil war and economic collapse began. And it's often said, and I read it everywhere, that if Georgia survived the 90s, it was because of its women. Is that true? And if yes, in what ways? And maybe that leads us to your publication on Georgian women in Germany, Empowerment Through Migration, that you published in 2009, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's, you know, yes, it's true, and it's still true because still Georgian economy relies much on the remittances that Georgian migrant women send from the countries they live in, and so as for this this one, it was this book, actually it's a monograph, not a book. It was my MA thesis,
right?
Which I wrote when I studied at Central European University, and it was, this research was based very much on my own experience, because I myself, it was in 2004. It feels like a lifetime ago. I myself went to Germany as an au pair for 1 year, and I lived there. So, you know,
like many others,
like many other young Georgian women.
Young women.
So, you know, it was my first, so Germany was my first foreign country. It was my first travel, my first flight. And, you know, in that context I was living, actually, it was the only option I had to go abroad and to live for some time abroad. So, and if we get back to the research, so it is, I decided to write it about young women's experience to Germany, a migration experience, and it was really different from the general pattern of feminized migration, because generally, and it is still like this, that middle-aged women migrate, and illegally, as domestic workers to Italy or Greece, for example, and it was illegal migration. So women went there as au pairs. And what they did, actually, there was also an interesting pattern, but I didn't fit into that pattern because I knew that I wanted to go back for some personal reasons. So the pattern was that they continued their stay there by applying to the universities and by getting this, you know, Western type education that wasn't available by then in Georgia, for example. And they continued their living there as students. They got these residence permits, they worked there. When I was talking with them, they constructed their lives, their general lives as success stories. And they felt that they were empowered through this migration, because they somehow managed to organize their lives there independently, and they had this very much emphasized this sense of independence they had there. So it was interesting to follow their narrative. And though many years have passed sometimes, and my research focus has changed, sometimes I still think that it would be it would be interesting to meet my respondents again and to talk to them now. So to find out how they feel themselves now, how they perceive their life in Germany now.
Yeah. Tamta, your first novel, Counting Out, or Abzählen in German, I said that before, I mentioned that before, it was written just after the 2008 war between Georgia and Russia, and in the center are two teenage girls in some provincial town in an unnamed war zone. And as much as I'd like to talk about your personal experience of that war that maybe is reflected in the novel, I'm, in the context of our talk now, I'm actually more interested in the narrative perspective, which I found very interesting, because the whole thing is told, the whole story is told by actually one teenager and two teenage girls. She and her girlfriend are in the center of this novel. And why did you choose this this teenager perspective, this young women, or not even women, perspective of young girls?
So, as you mentioned, I wrote this book almost 10 years ago, so I don't remember much about the thinking or writing this book. So I don't think that it was something conscious that I decided that, oh, let's write this book from the girl's perspective. I just chose it, and yes, it was my protest against this specific war of 2008. Well, I didn't experience it as a victim of war or something, but still it was a traumatic experience for me, like many other citizens of Georgia. Yes, I wanted that there is no specific place there, because I wanted to show that that these things that happen in this novel can happen anywhere where is the war. And I also wanted to show that the war is not something that that is the fear of the military or the soldiers or male politicians, that it affects like ordinary people and among the women and girls. So maybe that's why I chose this specific perspective of teenage girls to show how they might experience this closed environment of a conflict zone.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about your latest novel, published recently, 2020, Blackbird Blackbird Blackberry, which I was able to read as a sample, English sample, translated into English. Can you shortly tell us what is this novel about and what are its main themes?
Actually, it was released in February, and it's a bestseller. Okay. I didn't expect that.
Wow. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And it has, it has different layers. So it's about aging, it's about body, it's about sexuality, it's about environmental or ecological issues as well. So actually it's about a woman, a single woman, a middle-aged woman who tries to navigate in a very traditional and close environment. And it's also about her efforts somehow to defend herself as a single woman who lives alone without men and who actually enjoys her solitude. And what she does is somehow to build up, this defensive fence around her to feel safe and to lead the life she more or less wants to have. And it's also, it can be read, the novel can be read as the story of a repressed sexuality, of the woman with the repressed sexuality. But you know, I don't see it as the whole thing as a black and white. So I think that even if women in certain circumstances are oppressed in many different ways or repressed in many different ways, I think that they can still find spaces or ways to experience themselves, their body, their sexuality, etc. So it's also, in a way, it's also an inner exploration, inner journey of the protagonist. But I also wanted to tell something about the setting she lives in. But I didn't describe the setting per se, but I think that still I gave the sense of this setting through the reflections or emotions or feelings or reactions the protagonist has towards her towards the micro world she lives in. So some readers told me that the book is very culturally specific, so that mainly the readers from the countries who more or less live in the same context like Georgia would understand it. And in a certain ways, yes, it is culturally specific, but I don't think that, but I also think that it touches some, let's say, universal issues like the feeling of shame women experience in every part of the world. And this experience can be, well, the feeling of shame can be manifested in many different ways and can be experienced in different ways. But still, I think this is the feeling that is like that the women share, and the source of this shame is the same, the patriarchy. So I think that it's the novel deals with. It's in a way it's a specific, but in a way it can be appealing for the reader from, I don't know, from abroad.
We hope it will be translated very soon, so then we can judge as well. Hopefully. And I'm very curious to read it. Tamta Melashvili, Anna Kotsaya Samadashvili, Nino Haratishvili, Salome Binice, who, by the way, are all participants in this festival, but also writers like Nana Ektvishvili, Tamar Tandashvili, or Yununa Gurili, along with many others, are all acclaimed female writers who have also been translated into different languages in the past 2 years, and are, through their works, part of the current emancipatory process of Georgia, I would say, is my impression. Would you say there is something like a common thread or common theme that runs like a thread through their works?
I think that that most of us or all of us write from women's perspective. And it's something, you know, just we had some women writers before, but this is something new that so many women appeared on literary scene, and I'm very happy about this because they bring their you know, distinctive voices in Georgian literature, and in a way it can be explained by the fact that we don't have these institutional barriers anymore, though there are some cultural barriers still there, but we feel more free to express ourselves, to raise the voices to tell our stories. So all these women somehow fill up the literary scene with their voices now. And the voices are quite diverse and interesting, I find.
Yeah. You write a lot about gender and feminism. Could you just quickly describe what is the state of women's rights in Georgia today?
Sorry, I couldn't follow what.
Okay, I say again, what would you say is the state of women's rights in Georgia today?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not easy to, to tell in a few words, but women are stronger than they used to be. I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, especially young women, younger generation, they know what they want. They know how they want to achieve their goals, or they know how to follow their own path. And you know, this actually the feminist scene is quite diverse. It's also very diverse in Georgia, so it intersects with many other groups like ecologists, like left-wing groups, queer groups, and so on. So the fight goes on for a better life, let's say so, goes from many different angles. And yeah, and it's an interesting, very intensive and interesting process.
And I mean, an important question is, of course, because I mean, you are a writer and you are a teacher and you are an activist. For you, does it all depend on each other? Is it all one thing, or is it separate things? Do you follow the same aims in a way?
Overall, yes, but it feels like living comfortably in different rooms. For example, in the room of writing, in the room of activism, and in the room of teaching. So it depends how and when I feel comfortable in which room. So to express myself or to follow the things I want to follow. So, but overall, of course, it's the same for me.
Yeah, and I mean, a question that is not easy to be answered, but if you look back for the last 20 years, let's say 20 years in Georgia, do you think that female writing and its current focus on a broad range of topics, gender relation, sexuality, queerness, patriarchal structures, all these things that once have been taboos, do you think that this female writing might have a forceful or at least an impact on the emancipatory and social and political process in Georgia?
The writing, the women's writing. Oh, definitely. Yes, it's a part of this emancipatory process. By all means. So it's like the one thing which has different currents from different perspectives, and also of course like women's writing is one of the biggest current in this, let's say, in this wave. Or at least I see it like this, and I think that many other women writers would agree with me. No matter if they define themselves as feminists or not, but I think that most of them would say yes, this is also like this for
and it's our issues that we want to transport in our writings. Tamta, as usual, the time is much too short, and I would have so many questions, which I think I will continue to ask when I'm in Tbilisi. But I think I have to ask you the last question. What are you working on at the moment? Is there a new project, writing project?
No, by now, no, because I just started my PhD, so I'm mainly focused on my new research. But I have ideas mainly of the new novels, like at least 3 ideas, and let's see which one comes out first. But I have this urge of writing more intensively than I used to have before, because I'm 41, and I think that I have already lived more than I will live. So I want to I want to
Oh, come on, I hope not.
I want to dedicate myself more on writing. So in spite of the fact that I have some other things to do, I still want to go on with writing fiction.
Yeah. Well, Tamta, I keep my fingers crossed for all the projects that are waiting for you, and I really hope that there will be more translations, which would be great, and I will try my best to convince people, at least in Germany. And thank you so much for talking to me. It was very interesting to me and a great pleasure. And see you soon in Tbilisi.
See you soon, hopefully, and thank you for your interesting questions and for your nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.